And we have ordinance O-2207B, an ordinance relating to Article 16, Surface Water Protection, introduced by Councilor Richards.
And we will file the memorandum, and Councilor Richards for a motion.
I move for adoption of ordinance O-2012-07B.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilor Richards.
I know if you were going with me or Mr. Meter, so. The purpose of this ordinance originally was to preserve function and values of water resources. Now, we've all been through all the public hearings, a year of joint planning committee, planning board workshops, so I'm not gonna rehash everything that we've been over. It was a split vote out of the committee. I think that focused around the buffers. Predominantly for me it did. I felt that the buffer in the rural area was more than really we should have, based on what can be constructed, which is very little, 1- and 2-family houses, and I didn't think restricting people really had any value. And I personally further thought that the buffers downtown aren't big enough, where we know that water quality suffers, and there's no question the science proves that. So that's why I was not in support of this. So with that said, the Planning Licenses Development Committee, on a 3-2 split vote, recommends adoption of this ordinance.
Further discussion. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. This, and I think everybody here agreed, it comes right down to property rights versus the good of the public. And both of those have a lot of citations in American law. And I guess if you've been paying attention, nature has its own laws. And they've been trumping ours here lately. I think that we have gone through this, made some really good compromises, and made some decisions that gives up a little bit of restriction upon property owner rights, but by still recognizing that we really don't have dominion over land. We have stewardship over land, and we have to do the right thing. We've been kicking this can down the road for future generations for a long time, and I'm just not sure that there's a lot of generations left to hand this off to. So I think that we've made a lot of progress on this ordinance, and I think that we ought to be the generation that starts doing something about it. So I'm going to vote for this, and I'm going to ask you to join me.
Further comments? Councilor Manwaring.
Thank you, Your Honor. I also am voting for this. The Conservation Commission, of which I'm a member, supports it wholeheartedly, and I certainly agree with the work that they've done. I also want to add that I'm really, when we were just voting, we were talking about, where do we give the city manager power to negotiate? I think we really need that 30-foot buffer downtown. We have seen all along Beaver Brook, people, the residences, and Kingsbury Corporation being the biggest offender, being right on Beaver Brook. And I think that we need to have this saying, we're not going to allow this to happen again when it comes to changing what happens at the I'll call it Kingsbury Acres here. It's 21 acres that the city manager and Mr. Tebow spoke. So I think it's really important that we pass this for the reasons that Councilor Clark said, for the reasons that the Conservation Commission supported, and for Southeast Keene. Thank you.
Councilor Benicia.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was on, for a short time, the committee that built this the end of it. And I wholeheartedly agree with the science that is brought forth. But I think we have to look at the rights of the citizens. And we don't know how many people this is going to affect. And nor do we know how much money it's going to cost individual landowners. And I'm thinking specifically of small ones, not the large ones, but I'm not going to differentiate. If they want to go forward to get a variance on this, they're at the mercy of the planning board. And having worked both sides of the planning board, that's not a good thing to go into. It's not. I would like this to go through, but I would like it to go through with provisions that the city do the soil scientist test prior, and that individuals have a second right for appeal if they are denied.
Thank you. Further comments? Council Preaching.
Thank you, Your Honor. As the wise Abenaki chiefs used to say before every council, and I actually attended these meetings, Ina kola neumfi shopai. Indian language for we meet to discuss and do well for our community. You know, and tonight we're going to be looking at this ordinance, which goes back several years. And I agree with Councilor Clark that I think that what we've done is a good job in compromise. Not only from the 100 feet to 75, but most importantly, and if you look at your papers, in Section 102-1493, and I quote, there is language in the ordinance to allow the planning board to modify the buffer to less than 75 feet through the conditional use permit. This is really a saving for people who have a problem and a way to eliminate some of the problems that Councilor Vazina thought would exist. But most importantly, I want to thank Councilor Curran for his question. A very simple one. He asked, can this ordinance be changed? The answer is very simple. Yes, Councilor, it can be. And all fellow councilors, we can change anything that we vote for. We have that prerogative. And if we find that something is not working, then we have the opportunity to correct it. And I think this is something that we should think about a little bit. I think this is a good ordinance, and I think it's good for the whole city. And I thank my Abenaki friends for telling me how to handle this. So I'm going to ask you to vote in favor of this ordinance this evening.
Anybody else for the first time? Council Meader.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that's gone on in crafting this ordinance over the years. Citizens Committee, Joint Planning Board, PLD, we've spent a lot of time in workshops over the past couple of years. So there's a lot of effort that's gone into this, and I have to applaud the work that everybody has done on this. Councilor Clark is right. It's a balance. The impact that it has on landowners versus the common good. This ordinance seems to put a lot of burden on particularly the rural zone with a 75-foot buffer requirement. And that is a compromise from what we originally had as 100. I think that the conditional permit process is going to be burdensome. It's going to be expensive. I think we heard testimony from a prominent land planner in the community that it's going to be very expensive to deal with. I just think that on balance we haven't, the balance isn't level, and I think it's, I think the way the ordinance is written, we're not focusing as much as we should on the landowners, the rights of the landowners, and the value they have and will be able to use on their property. So I'm going to have, I voted against this in committee, and I'm going to have to vote against it at full council level.
Further comments? Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I apologize for my tardiness. It took me 4.5 hours to get from Boston.
Fully understand.
I can't quote the Abenakis, but I can quote Bruce Springsteen, who said, like a river that don't know where it's flowing, we took a wrong turn and we kept on going. And I think that's what this ordinance does. First of all, it's an overlay. And if you remember, when Nat Stout was on the council, he never liked overlays. He used to say overlays just become burdensome on landowners, and they become another layer of bureaucracy. And this time, I'm right with him. Especially this overlay, we've always been very protective whenever we did an overlay as to where the boundaries are. We've always tried to use boundary lines, whether it be geographic or zoning boundaries, every time, so it wouldn't look like spot zoning. This may not legally be spot zoning, but it sure looks like it when you look on the map. Now, how do you define the borders? How would you, when you have this ordinance, how would you police it? Every river and stream, there's no such thing as one that goes straight. You have two sides to every river and stream. You have the cut side and the bank side. One side is getting smaller, the other side is getting bigger. You get 20 foot down the stream, the sides have changed. And that's always happening. So those borders are always going to be changing. How are we going to police that? You look at the definition of a bank, and that could have another effect on the landowners, because the bank, according to the definition in here, could start 60 feet away from the actual water. So there's something else that's going to be hard for us to police. Now, if this ordinance passes, you know how many times the city will be contradicting itself? 5,800 times. That's how many water basins we have in Keene for water runoff, and what goes into that. Where do all those 5,800 basins go? To the streams, to the rivers. What goes in them? Garbage, debris, sediment, herbicides, pesticides, bacteria, E. coli. They run down our roofs, they run down our driveways, they run into our streets, into where we send them to the river. So we're really contradicting ourselves here. What we're saying is, we're doing everything we can to get our water to the river, but we've got to ask all these property owners to protect themselves, to protect our rivers and streams. I think we're really contradicting ourselves. All the years on the council, we've had a lot of guest speakers, a lot of consultants that we paid good money for. We had one come tell us how we should have green roofs in our downtown area because green roofs would prevent runoff into the rivers and streams. We had one that told us how we should be putting out incentives for pervious surfaces so we wouldn't have runoff to our rivers and streams, so we would get the water going down into the ground, being naturally filtered, going into our aquifers. Sorry. We've had a...
We need a buffer.
We had another consultant who told us that we should be raising our buffers between the sidewalk and the street so that water isn't rushing out into the street and down to the basins. It has the ability to go down. Once again, so I really think we're contradicting ourselves with all of this. We heard there were 1,600 property owners that were affected by it, and I just took a ride around all the streets in Ward 5, and I found 18 streets where there's property owners who could be affected by this. And what happens with this? When say they have a deck out there, they have a shed, they go to sell their property, or they go to refinance. You have a non-conforming use, you go for that loan, a red flag comes out once you go to the bank. And it's hard to sell or re-loan that property. I looked at some of the houses around town. If you look out on Base Hill Road, there's a nice, beautiful new house out there. That would be a non-conforming use. It's back right up to the stream, beautiful house, across the street from the condos out there. If those people ever tried to sell or refinance, they're going to run into problems. If you look at the Marconi Italian Club over on Wood Street, they'll naturally become a non-conforming use. God forbid they ever try to sell their property. They're going to have a problem selling it because, once again, the banks are going to look at it and say, wow, that's a non-conforming use. That red flag comes up. I like the title of the ordinance. I think we should be doing something for surface water, but I think we're going the wrong way. If you remember when we did the driveway ordinance about 3 or 4 years ago, I tried to introduce an incentive for putting pervious surfaces in back then, and it failed. So I truly do believe in what the people that wrote this ordinance want, but I think we're going about it the wrong way. Thank you.
Further comments? Councilor Greenwald.
Thank you, Your Honor. Two thoughts. I won't be redundant because there's been some really good speakers speaking. Regarding Councilor Pridgen's comment, we enact an ordinance with an idea that we could always go back and change it. I think that's incorrect logic. We need to have it right the first time. My experience is that once an ordinance has been voted and is in place, I can't be as witty as Councilor Jones, but it's like running uphill in sand, and it's very, very, very difficult. If this was going to be enacted, I think that the buffer should be the same in the rural zone and downtown. If it makes sense for downtown, it makes sense for the rural zone. The concept is right, the thinking is right, but it needs to be the same buffer. And I get a really strong sense that I haven't heard anyone making noise to amend to make the buffers the same. I will not. And since they are different, and I just don't feel that that's fair to the rural zone, I cannot support this.
Further comments? Councilor Chadbourne.
Thank you. I think that the opposition makes compelling points, and there's certainly things that I took into consideration. The Lacey's are good examples of good stewards that take good care of the land. I don't think all people have the land's best interest or the future's best interest. And Councilor Jones and Bruce Springsteen are from New Jersey. And my roots are Maine, and I'm part Penobscot Indian, and I have quite a affinity for the land and the water. I think that we have to think about our future, and I don't think it's realistic to apply the same buffer to the downtown area as it is to the rural area. But at one point, that rural area, Keene was rural. It had very little development. And as we encroached more and more, that affected our waterways, that affected runoff. There was more need for infrastructure. And the same could happen to those rural areas. And I think that we're looking to the future and protecting it for those that come after us. So I will be supporting this.
Further comments? Councilor Venezia.
Well, I'm so glad he showed up because he speaks so much better than I do on this. But
I'm glad he showed up too, so we have an odd number of people.
Well, you want to go take a walk?
He's entirely right, and he went in more depth than I could ever do. But we have to think of the people who now own the land, who expected when they bought it they could do X, Y, and Z, and now all of a sudden we've got this overlay thrown on them and they can't do it. That's not fair. I think there should be a period of time where we work into this, and I don't think that time period should be at the expense of the individual citizens. So, most likely, I should be making an addendum to this. Unfortunately, I can't place it correctly. All I can say is, if we vote it down and we go back, we could work it out so that everybody's happy with it. I hope.
Councilor Jacobs.
Thank you. I think perfection would be a wonderful thing. I think that I'm not likely to see it very often, but I think this ordinance makes some progress in a good direction. I think it protects vernal pools, which are not currently protected. And I think it gives us all a framework to think about more seriously the water resource. I agree that it doesn't belong to us. It's an inheritance that we've received, and if we are good stewards, it will still be there for those who come after us. So recognizing, and I've certainly shared some of my concerns about the ordinance, but I think it does move in a positive direction. Anything that we do for the greater good is going to affect some individuals in a way that they would prefer it didn't. But I think that's, what I've had to learn in my life, and I think my job here is to try and understand what the greater good is and to support it. So I'm going to support this ordinance.
Further comments? Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Boyd, I really want to thank Councilor Jones for coming in and mentioning all of the compromises that were made in this ordinance. Because if you really think about it, right from the beginning, I would really prefer that downtown, that they plug up all those pipes going into the river and make some sort of filter or something going on there. Do something about all of the runoff that's coming on, all of the impervious parking lots and what have you that we have all over the place. But the reality is that's already been done. That's already been developed. There's nothing we can do about that right now. Later on, we can come up with ways to divert those pipes from going into the river and maybe making more swales and filtering it or something like that. But what we can do is prevent future mistakes, future development that will compound the problem. Now, who here really believes that we don't have to change our behavior? Come on, really. Stand up and tell me that you don't believe that we don't have to change our behavior. We can just keep on going, developing in flood zones and doing all of the things that we've been doing all of these years. And I don't think anybody here really believes that. This is an ordinance that makes compromise, and that's what government's all about. You can't, come in and push something through that's not going to be real. I mean, it's got to be practical. And this is more practical than doing nothing. If we do nothing, how many more years is this going to take before we do anything? It's going to be a long time. Like I said, we're running out of generations to throw this on to. It's easy to think that, oh yeah, we got plenty of time. We have plenty of time. Think about that with other things, with oil and all this other. We don't have plenty of time. And nature's telling us that. And nature's laws are a little more important than ours. And one of these days, nature's going to take and sweep us away like so much dust. And then where are our laws and where are our rights going to be then? We're going to have to start doing something, and you all have to stand up and have the courage to do it tonight.
Councilor Venezia.
No, that's very interesting. We've been working on this for 7 years, and nowhere, as far as I know, along that time, did anybody ask the city to find out how many places would be affected by this particular overlay. And I think before we make an overlay without borders, we should know how many people, how much land is going to be affected. Again, I am not against the protection of the surface water. I am against the way the ordinance is being proposed to be placed upon the citizenry. So think about voting this down, going back, asking the city to come back with the number of parcels of land that will be immediately affected if this were passed in its present state. And then, if you're satisfied that it's only going to hurt 10 people, is 10 people okay? All right, pass it. Is 100 people okay? Well, okay, pass it. But let's know how many people, how many parcels of land are going to be immediately affected by this.
Councilor Chadbourne.
Yeah, I just want to mention that Mr. Fippard actually addressed that and gave us a specific number. And perhaps if we ask the planning director, he may recall it. I don't recall it, but he did have a specific number.
I don't believe anybody knows what the specific number of properties in the city that would be affected by this. Are you ready for a vote? All right, if you're ready for a vote, I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilor Clark.
Yes.
Councilor Prejean.
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
No.
Councilor Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilor Manwaring.
Yes.
Councilor O'Connor.
Yes.
Councilor Powers.
No.
Councilor Richards.
No.
Councilor Chadbourne.
Yes.
Councilor Meader.
No.
Councilor Venezia.
No.
Councilor Kern.
Yes.
Councilor Greenwald.
No.
The vote is 7 in favor, 6 opposed. The ordinance is adopted on a 7-6 vote.